Hello friends, today I'm going to take you on a tour of my personal library, this ostentatious bookcase you see behind me in every video. It's not just a YouTube backdrop designed to make me look studious or erudite. It's a fully functioning and ever-growing bookcase. So today I'm going to walk you through each shelf, and you'll likely see a lot of books that I've already discussed on the channel, but you'll also see a ton of books that I've yet to read or yet to mention on this channel. And also, this will be a nice time capsule for me to look back and see over time how my library has grown, how my reading choices and behaviors have developed and changed. So without further ado, let's get to it. Starting with this top shelf, you'll notice this is my Russian corner. This is my little piece of Russia. And besides the books themselves, I do have some little decorative items. This Matryoshka doll, another one up there, and these nesting dolls are obviously very distinctly Russian, were very popularly produced during the 20th century, so it goes along with all the books. But this first one you'll see that is a very pretty edition is a bunch of little short stories from Leo Tolstoy. And this book, along with a couple others you'll see on the lower shelves, I say jokingly stole them from my wife's grandmother, but she has a ton of these in her house, these pretty leather-bound copies, these Easton Press type of copies that she wasn't really reading. She more had them for decorative items, but I looked at them. I was like, oh, they're not hollow, just decorative pieces. They're actual books. And she was like, oh, you're actually interested in reading them. You're very into classical literature. Take them. And so after Christmas, when we were in town, I took like a massive box. And this was one of the books I took, and I'll show you the others in a bit. And I'll probably take more books when I go back this Christmas. But this copy is very pretty, and that's why I have it in the front. I haven't read the short stories in here, but I think it's got 4 or so short stories from Tolstoy. Small little print here, and just a very aesthetically pleasing copy. But I'll move that out of the way so we can see the other books. Before we get to this stack of primarily Dostoevsky novels, I'll touch on a few books over here. First up is 2 novels I've spent a lot of time talking about on the channel. First is And Quiet Flows the Don by Mikhail Sholokhov. We'll get to Bulgakov in a minute. And Quiet Flows the Don, Mikhail Sholokhov, and translated by Stephen Gary. Just a wonderful Russian epic. I read this at the end of last year into this year. A 5-star read, just a riveting, compelling tale, and very historically interesting because it takes you through the Don Cossacks, which are along the Don River, through times of peace, war, civil war, and revolution, all of that. And for someone who wasn't super familiar with specifically like the Red Army versus White Army and the civil war that emerged after the revolution, it was fascinating just to kind of see. And again, the characters, I think you find yourself just so attached to them. But without spending too much time talking about that novel, next we have The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. Just a atmospheric, fantastical tale about the devil and his little trio arriving to Moscow. And to me, it's equally entertaining as it is compelling and insightful and thought-provoking. Mixes in concepts of good and evil, the existence of God. It does a bit of a retelling or reshaping of the Gospels. And I think it's just a fantastical work and definitely one of my more enjoyable reads over the past year or so. And to continue with Bulgakov, I was very fortunate to find this copy of The Heart of a Dog. It's a Grove Press print. I don't know if they reprinted it through Grove Press again, but I've actually found this in one of my used bookstores locally. And when I was checking out, the woman at the register was like, oh, that's a great book. So I was like excited to read it. And yeah, it's a satirical take on communism of the time. It's a very short read. It's about the surgeon who takes in the stray dog, does a procedure. The dog slowly transforms into a human, but possesses all the common flaws of humanity. And it mocks the kind of Soviet or communist ideologies of the time. And it's an enjoyable read. I think if I reread it, I would get more out of it. So I'll likely do that at some point. But still looking for more works from Bulgakov. And that leads me to Alexander Solzhenitsyn's One Day in the Life of Ivan Desanovich. So this book is essentially takes you into one day of a prisoner in the gulags, these labor camps within Soviet Russia that were horrific, that were hopeless, and you really get that through this tale. It's a somber, serious, I don't know what you want to call it, abhorrent type of read. It's not too depressing. I wouldn't say that. So maybe I'm being a little bit exaggerative in the way that I'm describing that, if that's the right word. But it was an interesting read. I think it's a good introduction into what I'll get to at some point, which I have here on the shelf as well, is the Gulag Archipelago. But an interesting read. Again, another one you can read probably in like 2-3 days. I think it's only like 140, 160 pages, something like that. But a good introduction into, it implants you into the mind of a prisoner at the time. As someone who actually spent time in the camps and was able to write about it, I think it's a special work for that reason. Now, we move this little nesting doll and let's get to this stack here. So I've got 2 older Penguin copies from Nikolai Gogol. I have some short stories, The Diary of a Madman, and some other short stories in here. I know it's got The Nose, it's got The Overcoat, and it's got Diary of a Madman, of course, How Ivan Ivanovich Quarreled with Ivan Nikiforovich, and one other one in there. And then I have his famous Dead Souls, Via Dushi, I believe, if I'm remembering my Russian properly. Dead Souls, it's interesting. You know, part 1 is complete, but part 2 of it is incomplete. So in a way, I felt like for me, the novel was kind of lacking. But it's a very funny, satirical, humorous type of work. It definitely implants you into the mindset of at least the nobility class of Russia and the aristocrats of the time before serfdom was outlawed or the serfs were emancipated, which happened soon after, which kind of leads me to this Dostoevsky stack. But before that, I do have Resurrection from Tolstoy, which is maybe a good time to mention now that I haven't read Resurrection obviously yet, and this year I was debating on, do I start reading War and Peace or do I read Anna Karenina? And I've been reading Anna Karenina, and so I'm definitely halfway in here. So I'll probably finish this in the next 2 weeks or so, and then I think I'll read War and Peace next year. I'm kind of slowly outlining at least the big books I want to read next year, the mandatories in my mind. But really enjoying Anna Karenina. But I got Tolstoy there, Tolstoy here, and I do have another Tolstoy that's down with the kind of stack of penguins. But another Russian while we're here, Envy, Yuri Alesha. I talked about this, I think, 2 videos ago from when you'll see this. And another satirical, very short work, early 20th century book. But enjoying that. I'll have more to say on that, and a written review likely coming soon. But now let's get to Old Fyodor. So Fyodor Dostoevsky, I have his short stories here. I really love this collection of short stories. I think it's got some of the better ones. And so it's got, obviously, White Nights is a very popular one that gets talked about, but it's also got some other interesting ones that are lesser known. The Honest Thief, I thought, was kind of interesting, if I remember correctly. Christmas Tree and Wedding. There's a few in here that are, I don't want to say pointless, but you kind of finish them, you're like, okay. But it's got Notes from Underground actually packed in here as well. And then The Dream of a Ridiculous Man I've talked about recently as one of my favorite short stories, at least from him. And so I like this little copy. It's a Modern Library Classics edition. And then we have this stack here. So I have Notes from Underground, The Double and the Gambler, Crime and Punishment, The Idiot, Demons, and The Brothers Karamazov. All the Pivir and Volokonsky, I believe is how it is. This couple that translates all of his works. All vintage classic editions. I really love just how they feel, and even the bigger copies, how they kind of sit in your hand. These spines don't crack easy. They're comfortable to hold. The pages feel good. They feel well bound. So really like those. And this next work was recommended to me by Ruben over at To Readers It May Concern, and also Steve Donahue. And that is The House of Government by Yuri Sloskin. And this book, from my understanding, from what I've been told, is a bit of a biography, history, novel mix. And I'm just very excited to read this. It's a chunker, which is why I haven't started it yet. I'm thinking about like just nibbling at it slowly over time rather than making it like a consistent, dedicated read just because it is so big. But I'm definitely going to get to it, I think, in the next 6 months or so. But covers primarily, I think the early decades of the Soviet Union, those key revolutionary figures. And for that reason, I'm very interested. For those of you that, again, not to harp on it too long, for those of you that follow the channel, you know, not only am I very interested in Russian literature, but I'm interested in the culture, the history, I'm learning the language. So right now, it's very much piqued my interest and my curiosity. So definitely we'll get to this at some point, this big guy here. And before I make a mess on my shelf, as I mentioned, The Gulag Archipelago, Volume 1 by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Found this at my bookstore. And again, another somber, massive, longer read that I won't get to this year, but I'll likely get to it next year, if not soon. Maybe at like the tail end, but definitely a important work to read if you really want to understand the Soviet times and the consequences of those times. And the last book I just reviewed on the channel, Oblomov by Ivan Goncharov. I want to say one of my favorite novels, like one of my favorite Russian novels. It may be on the outskirts of one of the top 10 I've read so far. Just a really fun read, a very lighthearted, but also I feel like a profound book. You know, it can be read light, it can be read easy, and you can kind of breeze through it and just enjoy it, or you can really nibble on the dialogue, really reflect and extract as much as you want out of this work. But underrated in my opinion, even if it does have more praise than I'm claiming it has, I still think it's fairly underrated, and it belongs with some of these other novels up here that get more consistent praise. Before we move on over to this other side and I adjust the camera, I do have this little pipe here from my grandfather, just a nice aesthetic piece. His father actually, or I think it was his stepfather, made this little piece by hand, so very nicely kind of constructed, handmade wooden pipe here, and just again adds to the aesthetic over here with some of the older books. And then speaking of old books, this is probably the oldest book I have on the shelf. It's a copy of Shelley's poems here, and that is the, if I can get it here going, it's a very, I'm almost certainly gonna damage it, but it's Percy Shelley. So have his little picture in here. Some of these pages actually will straight up fall out, if you can see. But it's a very old copy here. I'm going to guess late 1800s, and just obviously a collection of his poems. But I thought it was a very nice, cute little book, and it was also at my, I guess you'd call it grandmother-in-law, my wife's grandmother's house, and I had to steal it. So anyway, that's this little corner and most of my Russian books. Let's head on to the other side. This side of the shelf is a bunch of hardcovers, a bit of a hodgepodge as far as editions and even kind of genres, if you will. But I have some Walter J. Black editions. I have some Easton Press or Franklin Press, whichever they are, some Everyman's Libraries, and other options as well. But starting off here, I have 3 of these Walter J. Black editions I got at a little bookshop in Buena Vista, I believe it was. Yep. And works of Nietzsche, which just ends up being Thus Spoke Zarathustra. I have Arthur Schopenhauer. It's a number of his essays, which I've praised here on the channel before. The Wisdom of Life, The Art of Literature, and Studies in Pessimism. I think as much as he is a pessimist and doesn't sound like a guy you would want to have a beer with or just chat with on a regular basis, I think his writings are chock full of wisdom. If you don't want to read his metaphysics and philosophy, if you just read his essays, I think everyone can really enjoy them and get a lot out of them. Moving on to the last little book here is the work of Francis Bacon. Definitely recommending this. Chock full. It's got, I don't know if it has all of his essays, but most of them. But I love these little editions. They're pretty nice. They're not the most rare in the world, and they're not the most aesthetic ever, but they're really nice for me, and I like the selections that are within them. But definitely recommend Bacon's essays. Next, I have some books I haven't read yet, but they came from, like I mentioned, my wife's grandmother's house that I just took from her house, basically, is the Confessions by St. Augustine. So here we got a Franklin Franklin Library Edition. It feels like it's never been opened once, which is probably the case with a lot of the books I took from her house. But yeah, it's in pristine condition, another aesthetic copy, and a book I do want to read. So everything I have on here, even for the decorative type of books, there are books I want to read. And I'd rather read this and have this on my shelf, in my opinion, than have like another Penguin classic of St. Augustine. But Walden and Other Writings by, of course, Thoreau here. Nice little copy. Let me see if I can tell you what those other writings are. What do we got here? Civil Disobedience, a number of, the collection of Walden, Civil Disobedience, Slavery in Massachusetts, A Plea for Captain John Brown, and Life Without Principle. So nice little edition here. I haven't read it yet. I think I read snippets like most people did of Walden in high school, but that's been a while, and I definitely wasn't reading it closely or with much care in high school. Next we got Ivan Turgenev, Fathers and Sons, and again, nice little edition. Doesn't feel like it's ever been opened. It's actually kind of hard to open, and the fact that it's this stiff tells me it hasn't been read yet. But again, another situation where I would rather have a copy like this and read it from here than read it from a Penguin. Next, two little Everyman's editions. I have one I just finished recently, Mikhail Lermontov, Garory Nashiva Vremeni, Hero of Our Time. And interesting work. So it plays along the same themes of the superfluous man and kind of being at odds or feeling alienated or a bit of an outcast within Russian society like Oblomov does, but a little bit different. And unfortunately, Lermontov, this is really his only published work. He died very young during a duel, as Russians happen to do in the in the 19th century. But an interesting work. It plays a weird chronological game too with the kind of entries, sections, chapters, however you want to call them, within this work. But interesting story. And then one I plan on reading soon is Alexander Pushkin's collection of stories here. A bunch of his stories. It doesn't have Yevgeny Onegin, which I have on a bottom shelf I will get to as well. It used to be up there in the old Russian corner, but I do plan to get to these. Pushkin's the one author the one very prominent Russian author I haven't gotten to yet that I need to. And his short stories are what he's most known for, along with his novel, Yevgeny Onegin. But yeah, I always love the Everyman editions. I wish I had more of them. But the last few over here are some stories or poems, collections of writings from Edgar Allan Poe. Again, someone I read bits of in high school, but have no recollection of those times or of those writings. So I do plan to nibble at this guy in due time. Another one I plan to nibble at is a collection of all the works, complete works of Shakespeare. Feels like just like a mandatory item or book collection to have in your library. But it's got a bunch of pictures as well of the plays mixed in this edition, and obviously, or it has all of his plays, sonnets, his complete works. It goes without saying. I don't know why I felt the need to elaborate there. And then this last corner, Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. And this little one I want to sneak out and talk about real quick is one I actually found in like a little thrift store, is The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, I hope is how it's pronounced. A Lebanese American writer who moved to America when he was quite young. And a very interesting work. It's written very much in a scripture-like way, where you have this prophet, and it's very short and written, with a bunch of vowels and almost prophetic type language or Old English type language. But I'll tell you what, it's chock full of very valuable insights, epigrams, pithy observations, and sayings and advice. I think a lot of it, you read it and you go, oh, well, duh, either because it feels self-evident of a way to live your life or to think about things, or because we see the same advice repeated in a number of religious texts or old writings. But there's a number of sections in here that I thought the metaphors used, the allegories made, were quite illuminatory, or they were illuminating, I should say. And so I definitely recommend it. This is a super short book. You can read it in a day. You can get any kind of edition. It's widely available. But I'll probably read more Gibran later on just because of the impression this book made on me. But let's move to the next shelf. All right, the first thing you'll see over here is my nice little copy of Gravity's Rainbow, which I just wanted to display and have in a nice little spot. But really, this section has nothing to do with Gravity's Rainbow or even fiction altogether. It's all of my philosophy, which if you followed this channel for a while, you know that that was really my first love. That's what drew me into really reading passionately and reading with curiosity and excitement was philosophy. And it's something I do want to get back to a little bit more, is just nibbling at some more philosophical works here and there. But this is essentially all of the philosophical works I have. The one thing that doesn't fit over here at all is these 3 Louis L'Amour books. So I got these for June on the Range with that whole kind of book YouTube event. I didn't make a video about it, but I hadn't read any Westerns and I wanted to dabble. And here out in Colorado, you can get these at any bookstore. There's like infinite copies of these. So I got Lando, I did read that. The Proving Trail, read that, enjoyed that one a little bit more than Lando. And then I also have Utah Blaine, have not read that yet. But I have those 3 books. But let me get those out of the way. Let's talk about the philosophy over here. So, first off, I have a bunch of Hackett editions, which I gotta say, these Hackett editions are highly ugly. I mean, they are just the most plain, straightforward thing, which is maybe fitting for the topic of philosophy. It is dry and mundane and uninviting. But Edmund Husserl's Ideas, the first kind of edition, I guess, or volume of this. So Edmund Husserl is the father of phenomenology, and this work is kind of like a good introduction, I think, to phenomenology, which emerges out of this tradition of German idealism, starting with Kant and leading to Hegel and others as well. Phenomenology, I would say it's not for me. I was very interested in it, and I think if you are interested, Husserl in this book is a good way to go. And there is a short, it's not fully complete, but there's a guy on YouTube doing some lectures on this book that I listened to as I worked my way through it. But to summarize, I don't remember a ton. I did take a lot of notes, so they're in my Notion, but a lot of it's centered around consciousness and its intentionality, basically. And I remember this halo of focus or the background objects. There's just, it is interesting, just not for everybody. It's not interesting to everybody, I'll say that. But back in here, I have Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, which is just a foundational work, I think, for just thinking about virtues, ethics, Greek philosophy overall. I think it's a great place to start with Aristotle. If you're looking for a good exploration into it, a good dialogue and discussion, I should say, around it, Jared Henderson right now on his Substack is doing a weekly breakdown, I believe, of each chapter in here. So check out that as well. Next, let me grab just a few of these and just work my way through them quite quickly. But I have Hobbes' Leviathan, another Hackett classic. I think Leviathan is it's a seminal work for political philosophy. I think he really lays the groundwork that Rousseau and many others build upon as far as exploring human nature and how human beings are, for the most part, naturally existing outside of a civilization, and how civilizations form to submit to a sovereign, the different options of sovereignty that you have and that you're submitting yourself to, thinking about laws, legislation. I think it's a great work. The back half that's spent on religion, you can just dump, but for the political philosophy, I think it's great. Next one, John Locke's Essay Concerning Human Understanding. I think, again, a great introductory work if you're getting into philosophy. He talks about sensations and a little bit of language and words and ideas, and he also gets into, identity a little bit, and some other concepts that I think are great introductory things. It's a very approachable work for just the average person, I think, to get into philosophy without feeling instantly repugnant towards it. But next one would be Spinoza's Theological Political Treatise. Not really a mandatory read. Essentially, to summarize it, he says, hey, I think each individual should be able to examine political works like the Bible, or political works, theological works like the Bible, and make their own assumptions and opinions on it. They can like look into it themselves rather than just accepting the opinions of the church. And at the time, that's a radical idea, to think that you can do your own exegesis and critical look into the Bible. But he says that you can. And because of that, it kind of shook up some things at the time. He got excommunicated, and the end of story. But his work, The Ethics, we'll get to later as well. Republic from Plato, another foundational work thinking about society, how civilizations to function, politics, all of that. Let me put these away and we'll jump to this next stack. This next stack here, we got still Hackett Classics, Johann Fichte's The Vocation of Man. Interesting work about identity and, again, the individual in relation to others, subjectivity. Is from my memory what was explored into that. It's another one I have notes of, but I would need a refresher. Plato's 5 Dialogues. I have a collection of Plato somewhere as well down here, but I think his dialogues are, I haven't read them all, so this isn't a fair take, but I feel like for the most part, I'm not a big enjoyer of the dialect, the what do you call it? The Platonic dialect, or the dialogue format of thinking through these philosophical ideas or thinking through ideologies, but some of them are quite enlightening. I do like this collection of the 5 that's in the Hackett. David Hume's An Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding. From my understanding, or from my memory, it sounds very similar to John Locke's, but it's very different. He's really looking at the relation of cause and effect, causality, dismissive of it, and I actually think if you're not into philosophy and you're just looking at it from a scientific approach, but want to dabble a little bit, Hume is a great person to think about. He has a treatise on human nature that I haven't read yet, but Hume is a very, he's a non-theological, I don't know if he was a professed atheist, but he had a very systematic, I think, approach that people who aren't enthused with philosophy will appreciate. But that's that work. We have Second Treatise of Government. If you're American, read this guy. It's a short little work from John Locke, who was very influential to our founding fathers. And besides just talking about government and the right to revolt against tyranny and all of that, there's some interesting concepts regarding private property and rights that emerge out of this work. So worth reading. And René Descartes' Discourse on Method and Meditations on First Philosophy, another like must read. If you want to understand philosophy, you have to read Descartes, you have to read a bit of Plato and Aristotle. You have to understand where the Greeks are coming from, because they, again, kind of begin the tradition, and you have to read Kant. And then you can kind of get a little bit out of the place. But let me get up another stack of these guys. All right, this next stack, we're beginning with some Kierkegaard, Two Ages, and actually very interesting and lesser discussed work from Kierkegaard. Usually people talk about Fear and Trembling, either or, good works, but Two Ages is very interesting when it comes to the relation between an individual and a group and an ideology, and this kind of triadic relationship between them, how an individual is to stand out and not be submerged or subverted by the masses. And I think we see that heavily today with collectivism, collective ideology, cult thinking, hive mind. So actually, if you want to not understand it better, because this is actually a literary review of a book that Kierkegaard does, but a lot of the ideas that are contained within it are quite fascinating. I'd highly recommend it. Although these editions are very nice, they have this kind of matte feel and finish to them. They're kind of expensive though, but they are nice. Next one is The Sickness Unto Death, and I'll honestly group it with the concept of anxiety. I think these kind of go decently well together. They both explore, they're very religious books, as Kierkegaard is very much a theologian and philosopher. I'd have to look at my notes again, which maybe tells you I didn't really enjoy them or find myself captivated by what they discussed. Next one, Being in Time. I have nothing to say about this book. I made it 80 pages and gave up on it. Very confusing. The World as Will and Representation by Arthur Schopenhauer. Very interesting work. If you don't want to get on with the metaphysics and all of it, basically to summarize it, he believes very much in a Buddhist or Hinduist influenced, or Hinduism I should say, influenced concept of the will, and the will for him is this driving force, this energy that's in everything, not just living beings, but rocks and plants, and well, plants are living, but you know, it's in everything, and it's this insatiable will of striving, and that's what drives us to keep existing, drives us to do everything. As we have this, we can never be kind of happy or reach some state of utopia or homeostasis, because our bodies are constantly in the state of striving. It's this insatiable will that's in everything. It's kind of interesting, even if you don't buy into it literally. Thinking through it, I think, is very applicable to the natural world that we observe. And then the Prince, Niccolo Machiavelli, again, another very important, very talked about work in the realms of politics and political philosophy. You hear Machiavellianism all the time, and I think it's important to read it rather than just kind of run with the term. So let me grab maybe this last stack, and then we'll move on to the other side. All right, last stack of philosophy. We got Friedrich Nietzsche's The Gay Science. In my opinion, this might be the place to start with Nietzsche. I wouldn't start at Thus Spoke Zarathustra. I wouldn't start with Beyond Good and Evil. On the genealogy of morals might be a good place to start, but The Gay Science is also a great spot to start. It's jam-packed full of different discussions on a variety of topics. I really like his discussions on labor and leisure. I feel like I don't really hear much about that, but this is really where he begins his famous attack on Christianity with the whole God is dead proclamation. And he's not really rubbing it in Christianity's face. I think he gets a bad rep, although he is very polemical and acerbic, I would say is the right word, with his attacks on religion and Judeo-Christian values. But he's equally upset about, okay, well, if we don't have religion, if we don't have divine morality, we're kind of cast into this whirlwind of ambiguity, perhaps, or obscurity with defining purpose and meaning and morals and values and all of this. So, but if you're interested in Nietzschean philosophy and even just want to get some good insights and thoughts about life and his aphorisms, this is the place to start. I really like Walter Kaufmann's edition. And honestly, I've heard people say that I should just get all of his editions, his translations. But another book here that will rile up some people is Ayn Rand. People love her. People despise her. I thought about making a video on her at some point. If you guys really want that, let me know. But to do that appropriately, I would need to actually read The Fountainhead, read Atlas Shrugged. I can't just rely on the essays. But I will say, if you're looking to get a taste of Ayn Rand without reading those massive fictional novels, read her collection of essays here, The Virtue of Selfishness. Regardless of if you think her ideas fully fleshed out and fully accepted and incorporated into society would be a good thing, just hear them out, read them. I do think there's some merit to her ideas, but for example, an objectivist opinion of getting rid of like most or all regulation and kind of doing away with a lot of programs, I don't think it's all good. It's definitely not all good, but I'll leave it there. But an interesting work nonetheless. Next, Kierkegaard is back with his Fear and Trembling. And I like this little Great Ideas edition. It's not going to show up on camera well, but it's a very pretty copy. I've seen other editions at bookstores before, but I just didn't feel like picking them up. But Fear and Trembling, my first Kierkegaardian work that I read, and very, very interesting piece of philosophy, especially in regards to existentialism, individualism, and thinking, because a lot of it is spent exploring the biblical story of Isaac and Abraham, and how he was, just about to sacrifice his son, and he did it from a place of higher value. So it isn't explored in this work, but one of Kierkegaard's ideas is kind of these three stages of life, where you have the initial stage of hedonism, basically, and self-centeredness, and you're looking at pleasure as like the meaning or highest value of life. Then there's the kind of community or ethical stage, where you're looking at, okay, I'm doing what's best for the community, for the family, for the church, or no, I wouldn't say the church, but for like the state, things like that, something higher than yourself. And then there's the kind of transcendent level that's like more religious side of things, where you know you're serving a higher power. You have this greater purpose, aim, and meaning in life that is like the utmost importance, and that's how he supposedly justifies Abraham being willing to kill his son from a place of means more than me, this means more than the community. It's kind of higher end. That's a very rugged and probably not quite accurate way of describing it, but I'm just thinking extemporaneously here, so give me a break. But I do have a video, it's an older video, maybe like a year and a half ago, exploring those like 3 stages in a more accurate way. So if you're interested, if that piqued your curiosity, check out that video. Every college student's favorite book, The Communist Manifesto, mostly joking, but an interesting work. Some guy attacked me in the comments when I mentioned this work. I don't project or claim that this book contains all the ideas of communism. Obviously, I need to read Das Kapital by Marx and would need to read more to fully understand it. But it does lay out a lot of the ideologies that are recklessly professed by naive youth, and that we saw fleshed out in different communist regimes throughout the years, and how they were kind of transmuted or distorted basically by these different revolutions and so forth. But again, a very short read, and I think most people that are getting into this ideology are just reading something short. They're not reading Das Kapital. So for that reason, definitely worth reading. Next one, Existentialism is Humanism. I've talked about this before in my starter kit for existentialism. If you want to get into existentialism, if you don't care about philosophy, but you're like, there's something about individuality that interests you, and the individual in relation to others, and free will, read Jean-Paul Sartre's Existentialism is a Humanism. Every young man's favorite book, The Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. Ryan Holiday has made this thing famous and made people worship this Roman emperor, and for a good reason. It's a phenomenal book. It's full of great life advice. It's a great philosophy of life, but don't end your Stoic journey here. There's more to read. Next one that's similar, but like not Stoicism, La Rochefoucauld's Collected Maxims and Reflections. Just like Meditations, it's kind of broken up in a bunch of like epigrams and smart little sayings and suggestions about life and observations. La Rochefoucauld was a frequenter of French salons. He was this nobleman and writer of the time, and so he had a lot of experience with conversations and being social, interacting with people, power dynamics, all of that, and a lot of that's contained in here. And I wrote on my Substack about 5 of like my favorite takeaways from this book. So if you're interested, check out my Substack. It's linked somewhere in the description. Last, a book just to make you look really smart, The Phenomenology of Spirit by, what's his full name? It's some long name. We'll just say Hegel. Just by Hegel, Friedrich Wilhelm something Hegel. But this is a book that I understood maybe 5 or 10%, and at this point I remember maybe 2%. I'm not going to recommend it. I'm just not, but I have it, so there we go. Another work, the first probably philosophy book I really got into was The Will to Power by Friedrich Nietzsche, of course. And this is a collection of like his writings. It was published posthumously, and it's I don't think it really, from my memory, it doesn't target like one specific thing because it wasn't made to be a published work, but it is a bit of a good introduction to some of his work. So maybe you start here, if I would say, if you're trying to get into Friedrich Nietzsche, but a good work nonetheless. And then 2 Open Court Classic editions, neither of which I would really recommend, but going with German idealism, we have Schelling's philosophical, what is it called? Philosophical Inquiries into the Nature of Human Freedom. I'd say it's better than some of these works as far as philosophy if you want to read it, but it's a heavy read despite its brevity. And then Discourse on Metaphysics by Leibniz. Leibniz is an interesting character as well. This has 3 different works from him. I would say like just the first 80 pages or 100 pages are worth reading, but you know, it's philosophy for you. And to end the shelf and part 1 of this tour, because I'm realizing this is going to be absurdly long if I make it just one video, we have the Dude Bro Corner, David Foster Wallace, who shamelessly is one of my favorite writers, who unfortunately passed away in 2008. But he's one of my favorite for a number of reasons. He's not just incredibly funny with the way that he writes, not only his fiction, but even his essays are almost gonzo type journalism, and the way he weaves in, he kind of fictionalizes it, but also has just biting satire and humor mixed in. But he's also just very insightful, in my opinion, with how he foresaw the problems and consequences that were emerging within culture at the time. He discussed the concerns over entertainment and cynicism and self-interest and irony well before we're seeing the manifestation of it now, where it's just, you know, the things he discussed in Infinite Jest were hyperbolic at the time and are now just everyday use of entertainment and people being absorbed into technology and entertainment and pleasure. And yeah, but to get to it, I've read a lot of his works. I still need to read The Broom of the System, his collection of short stories, and Oblivion, and some more of his essays. But to talk about the books over here, I have Infinite Jest, a nice hardcover copy I picked up. I have the paper copy, or the paperback copy, that I brutalized last summer when I read it. And then The Pale King, which actually was the first book I read from him, and when I have this desire to return to, just because I think after reading some of his other writings, listening to interviews, I'll have a better grasp of it. It was put together posthumously, so it's not, again, fully fledged out. It's not perfectly edited. It's a little all over the place and follows a very boring, mundane topic of an IRS worker. And that can be quite, again, hard to really lock in while you're reading about. But Infinite Jest, I've talked about it before on the channel. I won't ramble too long on it, but a bit of a calling card for dude bros out there, which I'm shoved into that corner, and I won't push back. But I think I'm more than that. But the other few books I have over here, Curious Girl with Curious Hair from Dave Foster Wallace. Some of the stories in here are great. Some of them are great. I really liked My Appearance. I really liked Little Expressionless Animals. I remember, I think, Say Never and Here and There, Everything is Green. Some of those are interesting. And it also has a novella at the end, Westward, The Course of Empire Takes Its Way. That to me is just him, just as he does, rambling a little bit too long on certain things, and making jokes that are mildly funny, making them like 60 pages. But anyway, that collection was okay. I think I gave it 3 stars. This collection, though, the 2 collections of essays I have from him are really phenomenal in my opinion, specifically the A Supposedly Fun Thing I'll Never Do. But Consider the Lobster, really good edition. You start right in the beginning with a essay about pornography, which, you know, as someone who's quite young, I don't have experience of what it was like pre-internet, but I know how depraved and abhorrent the culture around it is today, and how widely accessible it is, and how promoted and culturally, I don't want to say encouraged, but almost encouraged or accepted it is today, with OnlyFans and all that goes on. But to not explore too much, it's interesting to see how he was writing about it in the 90s. But you also have a lot of great essays on literary topics, such as Kafka and Dostoevsky and Updike. And you also have an essay where he was following John McCain's campaign back in, I believe it was the year 2000. It wasn't the year he ran against Obama. It was before that. And he also has an essay here about how people reacted to 9/11. So very interesting collection there, but to me, the kind of crown jewel of his essays is contained in A Supposedly Fun Thing I'll Never Do Again. In my opinion, I can't really say it's like the best essay ever, because I haven't read that many essay collections. It would be reckless to say such a thing. But his E Unibus Plurum, his long essay on television and fiction, is marvelous. I think it's, if you don't want to buy the book, if you're not a big David Foster Wallace fan, just read the PDF, find it online. It's widely available. It's about 60 pages, and it's fascinating. On on the topics of people's kind of addiction to TV, on the topic of reality TV, which I think extends into how we experience social media today. All of it very interesting. The idea of the individual in relation to the masses and kind of being subsumed by the masses, yet trying to stand out, and advertising and the deceptiveness of it all. Very interesting. His essay about the fair, which I believe is titled "Getting Away from Already Pretty Much Getting Away from Already Being Pretty Much Away from It All," where he goes to the Iowa State Fair. If you've ever been to a state fair, you will be dying laughing at the story and also like really resonate with it. I grew up in Virginia and went to the state fair pretty much every year with my family because my grandfather grew up doing that. And it's just a phenomenal short story, and the way he again will take something that seems quite mundane or plain, or even something serious, and make it funny is great. And I also really enjoyed the last essay, his famous essay about going on a cruise, and all the shenanigans and pampering that goes on with that. So if you're a hater of cruises, you'll find that quite funny as well. But that's going to be it for this video. That's it for David Foster Wallace. That's it for the Dude Bros out there. If you guys have any questions about these books, I'd love to chat about it in the comments below. I will get a part 2 of this tour up very soon, but subscribe for more content like this, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.